Welcome, everyone. My name is Gordon Wilkins. I'm the Robert M. Walker Curator here at the Addison Gallery of American Art. And on behalf of our director, Allison Kemmerer, and the entire team at the Addison, we'd like to thank you for coming on a Sunday afternoon to visit with us and to hear these two remarkable speakers, Kay WalkingStick and Wendy Nālani Ikemoto. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce both of our speakers. And I should mention their show, when Kay WalkingStick Hudson River School is now open at the Addison. The museum opens at 2, so everyone, I hope, will go immediately to the galleries to see the work in person because, of course, you can't capture the intensity and beauty of the work on a slide. So our first speaker, or in conversation, the first person that I'll introduce is Wendy Ikemoto, Dr. Wendy Ikemoto. Wendy is Vice President and Chief Curator at the New York Historical Society, where she leads the museum division. She's curated such exhibitions as Lost New York, Kay WalkingStick, Hudson River School, Nature, Crisis, Consequence, Monuments, Commemoration, and Controversy, Dreaming Together, New York Historical Society and Asia Society Museum, and the award-winning Scenes of New York City. She oversees the museum's painting, sculpture, and drawings collections and has spearheaded major acquisitions, including works by Betty Saar, Augusta Savage, and Kay WalkingStick. She established the institution's Meet the Curator program and helped to develop and teach in the Master of Arts and Museum Studies program created jointly between the New York Historical Society and the City University of New York School of Professional Studies. For International Women's Day 2024, Ikemoto was profiled in the New York Times. She holds a BA in art history from Stanford and a master's and PhD in the history of art and architecture from Harvard University. Our second speaker, Kay WalkingStick, is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. Her six-decade career is both a visual record of her life experience and her attempt to present Native American history as a crucial part of American history. She draws on formal modernist painterly traditions as well as the Native American experience to create works that connect the immediacy of the physical world with the spiritual. Attempting to connect the present with the past, her complex works hold tensions between representational and abstract imagery. Her paintings represent a knowledge of the earth and its sacred quality. WalkingStick's work is in many museum collections, far too many to mention. But of course, we'll start with the most important one. She's in the Addison Gallery of American Art collection. Very recently, so we are so thrilled. It hasn't even been approved by our trustees, so don't tell anyone yet. But it's in the show, so you'll see it. Also in the Denver Art Museum, the Detroit Institute of Arts, Metropolitan Museum of Art, Minneapolis Institute of Art, Museum of Modern Art, Smithsonian American Art Museum, New York Historical Society, National Gallery of Art, National Gallery of Canada. The list goes on and on and on. She's also invited to participate in Foreigners Everywhere, the 60th International Art Exhibition of the Venice Biennale, which is currently on view through November. So if you're in Venice, be sure to check out Kay's amazing work. She received a BFA from Beaver College, now Arcadia University, and an MFA from the Pratt Institute. She holds a PhD from both Arcadia University and Pratt Institute. In addition to being a renowned painter and scholar, WalkingStick is a beloved and respected educator, serving as professor of fine arts at Cornell University from 1988 until her retirement as professor emerita in 2005. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Kay WalkingStick and Wendy Nālani Ikemoto to the stage. Thank you both so much for joining us.
I'm old, but I'm still standing. It's nice to be here. Hello.
Well, I just would like to say thank you so much to Gordon for those introductions. Thank you to Gordon and Allie as well for bringing this show to the Addison Gallery of American Art. We're absolutely thrilled.
I am thrilled.
So, Kay,
May I add
yes.
my thanks to the, I'd like to add my thanks to the museum for inviting us here today. It's really nice to talk about the work with people who obviously are interested because you showed up on a Sunday afternoon. So thank you so much for being here.
So, Kay, it's always a pleasure to speak with you about art. And I want to say that, this exhibition is about a conversation between your landscape practice and the Hudson River School of the 19th century, separated by almost 200 years, but both engaging with the meaning of landscape practice and of North American terrain. And we were just walking through the exhibition together, and you talked about the special thrill of seeing your work in conversation with the Hudson River School, this movement that is thought to have forged the American landscape tradition. So could you talk a little bit about why you find it thrilling?
Well, at least partly. The thrill is the fact of showing with artists who I have regarded since girlhood as the great American painters. And to have that comparison, to think that my own work can be shown with this kind of work and hold its own, is a thrill. I mean, it's just a thrill to me. Very exciting. And to see the interaction, the comparison, the different ways. For instance, if you look at the different ways that, we were looking earlier at the different ways that people depict water, the ocean, and how we are all seeing the same thing, but finding different ways to depict it. How do you depict water? And this is a problem that every painter that faces landscape has got to deal with. So that having these comparisons between the different approaches, I find exciting. And as a matter of fact, more exciting than if it were simply a show of my work. Now, of course, there's an ego high. I mean, there's that in showing your work in an independent gallery, all those white walls with your paintings on them and everything is a big ego thing. But for me, to show with these amazing painters, I mean, they're just amazing painters over and over again of the 19th century, is that there's a special feeling of, maybe it's simply accomplishment, that I accomplished what I set out to do when I was 18. It only took 70 years, but, it's a good way to spend a lifetime.
Kay, maybe we could think particularly about the works on view in this installation shot. On the far right, you're looking at a painting by the great Asher B. Durand, one of the preeminent Hudson River School painters. It's a landscape of the Ausable River in the Adirondacks. And then in the center of this installation shot, your painting called Durand's Homage to the Mohawks. Could you talk about this painting and the series of which it is a part?
It's a rather wordy story how all this started, but we were in semi-lockdown for a while there, weren't we, with COVID? And so I had a lot of time at home, and I was thinking about things that I would like to do that I've thought about over the years and never got around to doing. And one of the things that I always wanted to do was to see if I could paint something that was similar to one of those great 19th century painters. But also, I wanted to point out that how very seldom did they include Native people and the fact that they were on Native land. I mean, they were just Native land. And occasionally you'll see a little drawing of, or a little painting of Native people, but in general, the Native people were just left out. It was like they were gone. They'd gone elsewhere. They weren't home. And that always kind of disturbed me, that they were very often not in the paintings. So I decided to do a couple of copies of paintings, and so I purchased some large museum. There's a company that works with museums and makes large photographs of their paintings that you can buy. So I bought a couple of these, and the ones I chose Thomas Cole's Oxbow because it's probably the most famous painting of American art in the textbooks. You know, it's the one everybody has seen. I'm not so sure it's the greatest painting. It's just the painting that everyone knows, right? So I thought I'd use that painting. I also chose a Duran because I think that Duran was the best painter. I mean, he was a terrific painter. You'll see when you're going through the galleries. There's a number of Duran paintings, and they're just spectacular. Anyway, I altered the format because I normally work on a double square, but it's this double square size. And these paintings are usually a golden rectangle, which is a different shape slightly. So they're longer. My paintings are longer. So you'll notice that the format is different. But I tried to make paintings based on these photographs of these wonderful paintings. So there's a jog in between. I didn't have the painting to paint from. And I did the best I could. I mean, they're different. It's a different painting, but I think that they're relatively successful in that you would recognize that they're based on that painting. To tell you the truth, I got sick of it. I got really tired of it. I thought, oh God, I'm copying another painting. Why am I doing this? But so I did actually 3. I did 2 of the Duran. One is on paper, one is on wood, and I did one of the Thomas Cole. And I decided that I had to somehow add a native patterning to these things, so I just went ahead and did it. There's a problem finding patterning of native objects, artifacts, because so much of many of the Eastern artifacts have been destroyed. People would buy a basket or get a basket and use it as a trash can and then throw it out. I mean, it was really that casual. So that a lot of this early material is gone. It's just not here. So I had some trouble finding early patterns, but did that. One of them has a Mohawk pattern. And the Mohawks, of course, are still around and kicking a lot, and good for them. And they're making wonderful objects now. So that I was able to use a Mohawk pattern. I believe this one has a Mohawk pattern in it, doesn't it? And the other one is, the other pattern I used, I found a pattern that was from a tribe that is now extinct. The people, the DNA is still there, I think. The people are still there, but there was a war with the Mohawks. They lost and they scattered. So they went and joined other tribal groups. So that specific tribe is not there, but the people are still there. Does that make sense? I think what this comes down to was, for me, it was a study period. I was learning about how these 19th century people worked, how they developed their painting, how they constructed it, how they composed it. I was also learning a little bit about the people of that area. I know much more about Native people of other areas in the country. So that it was a good thing to do during that period of our shared problems with COVID. It was an effective thing for me to do. I have no desire to copy another painting. I've done that.
What fascinates me about your two painting series, as it turned out to be, is that, it was created during the pandemic, and so typically in your landscape practice, my understanding is that direct engagement with the place that you are painting is really core to your practice. And in this case, because of the pandemic, effectively, the historical representation of the land stepped in between you and the land. And so this is you engaging as much with the place as with its historical representation. So you're taking this, this paintings from this group of artists that is generally credited with creating the American landscape tradition, but you're forging new paths. You're moving it forward through these patterns, through attention to what we see in the landscapes, even through your titling. Duran's homage to the Mohawks. Tom, where are the Pecumtucks?
Where are the Pecumtucks? I know they're there. It was an interesting thing to do, but as I said, I would not do it again. And there is this, I prefer to go to the land, to see it, to draw it, to photograph it. I never actually paint. Although I daydream of doing it, I don't. I bring back the drawings. I sometimes do watercolor, but I bring back the drawings and the photographs and work in my studio from that. But I have an excellent visual memory. I really remember things that I see so that I can go and it's like the vision of the place is within me, it's within my brain, it's back there, so that I can work from a painting, a drawing, I can work from a photograph and bring that memory of the place to the foreground and paint it. When you're working from a photograph of a painting, it's an entirely different experience. And I think that's why I got so sick of doing the copies, is because I wasn't working from something that I had direct knowledge of. I want to know how a place smells, how it looks, how it vibrates, how it talks to the viewer, how it talks to that person who's within it. And that's what I think is important to convey in the paintings. So if you see a difference between, say, that Duran copy that I made, when you look at it, and then turn around and look at the paintings behind you, I think there's a sea painting back there, you'll feel the difference. It's there. It's just there.
So I think we agree that Gordon did an amazing job with this installation, really fitting it to the Addison spaces and building the exhibition out from its showing at the New York Historical Society by including new additions from the Addison collection. So, Kay, I wonder if you could talk about a few of those additions, and I'm thinking in particular of the one that Gordon mentioned in his introduction, this new acquisition, an early work of yours.
This photograph is very misleading. I'm sorry, it's very misleading, but that's okay. You can see it later. This piece is this big. That's 20 inches, right? Maybe not even that. It's a small piece. It was made as I was calling them maquettes at the time because it was a painting and it was done with painter's materials. So it wasn't a sketch, but it was a plan for a later painting. And actually, I made paintings that are huge, not huge, big, maybe 5 feet long. That's not huge, right? Big paintings that are based on these little maquettes that I did. and that it's a poured ink in the center, which is kind of an imagined, I was going to say fantasy, but it's not fantasy, it's imagined landscape, right? It has a landscape atmosphere about it, the poured paint. And around it, there is a much thicker paint. It was acrylic at the time, with a line that's, I'm not sure whether it's drawn or scratched, or I've forgotten exactly how I made the line, but there's a little, I believe, blue line around it, maybe just painted, which ties down this interior shape. And people always say, you know, like, what is the interior shape? I think I was playing around in my head at the time with draped fabrics. So the shape has kind of a draped fabric look. I had done paintings based on my painting aprons. And I did a painting of a teepee that was sort of partially undraped, partially taken apart, you know. They were movable, so they came apart all the time. I was playing around with these shapes. So this is a kind of draped hide or a fabric, but it has a draped quality. And I'm not going to nail it down any more than that. But the blue line tended to hold that draped shape. The paintings that are done based on that are very, very similar. I was using acrylic and wax. At the time, I added wax because, and it's a cold wax formula for those of you who know about things like that. Saponified cold wax mixed with acrylic, which gives the paint a kind of a naturalistic look. You know, the problem with acrylic is it always looks like plastic to me. You know, like one of those plastic bottles you use for your washing machine. So by adding a wax to it, a natural substance, little bees make it, for goodness sakes, this lovely natural, smells heavenly, by the way, this natural product to the acrylic, it gives the acrylic a kind of natural look. It looks like it's made by Mother Nature, not by a chemist. So that's why I added the wax, is because of the way it looked and felt. Eventually, I used the wax to build up the paintings, but originally it was just about changing the nature of the paint itself, if I could. So this little painting, which is, I say, tiny, is the beginning. It's the seed that sprouted into these giant, not so giant, big paintings, this painting series, which went on for about 6 months or so, maybe a year.
Well, Kay, let's...
Does that help? I mean, I don't know if it helps to talk about a thing like that, to tell you the truth.
I hadn't heard you describe the saponified wax medium that you created in precisely those terms, and I'd love to skip ahead to look at one of those large abstractions that came out of this series. And because you taught, Kay, so beautifully about your materials and processes in working these paintings up, which, as you say, are about formal abstraction, but they do reference nature, and partly through this medium that smells, as you say, like honey.
Yeah. Yes. This painting, it's called Satyr's Garden, I believe, isn't it? Is that the right? And the reason it's a satyr, of course, is because there's something kind of nasty and wonderful about this paint. I mean, it's like a little bit naughty, you know, and a little bit delicious and a little bit seductive. I'm talking about the paint itself, of course. So that when you put this paint down, and I put it down in layers, and it's sometimes as many as 30 layers, which gets very heavy. I used to be a big, strong girl. I'm still a big, strong girl, but the paintings I can't lift any longer. But this has within it shapes that were derived from that little painting that you were just looking at, right? Because if you look at it, you see there's two arcs. The arcs are the negative shapes that are around the draped fabric, okay? So if you have these arcs, I mean the draped fabric is here, what is not fabric is this big arc, these four big arcs around it, right? So the arcs are in this painting, directly derived from the earlier paintings. The surface itself is the same material, just a whole lot thicker. I was told by what do you call people who repair paintings? They're like restorers, right? I was told by a restorer that the paintings wouldn't last more than 30 years. That's going to be on the floor. That whole thing is going to be on the floor. And I said, you mean it's not going to hold on to the painting? It's not going to hold on to the canvas? She said, absolutely not. No way that painting is going to make it. And this was, when were these done? 1970 something. So obviously they're hanging on. They're okay. That material is working. It's holding its own. Because it's acrylic, about 70% acrylic, maybe a little bit more, to about 30% wax. So I figured it's enough acrylic to hold it, and it's doubled. The canvas is doubled. I glued it together with archival glue and weighted it. I mean, the simple painting was a pain in the neck to make, but it's still there. And you'll find when you see it that the part of the arc is raised. It's raised with a acrylic modeling paste, so that the painting is actually a wall sculpture. It really is. It's thick. It's 3 inches deep. The arc is raised. It's and as I said, complex to make, simple to see. It looks very simple, straightforward painting about painting.
Kay, could you also describe for us the tactility of this material and your experience working with it?
As I said, it's Sater's Garden. It's delicious. It's delicious material. It's like painting with thick mayonnaise, if you can imagine that. It's really gooey and wonderful, and as I said, smells good, and it was a lovely experience. And then I would cut into it. I believe this has cuts in it. I usually used a woodcutter's gouge to cut into it. Sometimes I used my fingernails, but that hurt, so I quit that. And so I used a gouge to make marks in it so that, anytime you manipulate color, you're manipulating space. I mean, it implies space. But I also wanted other ways to imply the space within it. So I think the cutting was about that. And it was sort of adding a second energy to the energy of the paint surface itself. I was painting with my hands, of course, and I did wear gloves, but painting with my hands, that painting with your hands gives a thing a tremendous energy. One of the reasons I think that craft objects, and my darling niece just bought me a beautiful cup she'd made, and one of the reasons that cup has such energy is because it's made with one's hands. It's a direct thing. So the baskets that you'll see upstairs are handmade things, literally handmade things, so that they have an energy, right? And this painting has an energy, at least in part, I think largely, but at least in part, because it's made with my hands, my energy is on that painting, and you can feel it. You can feel it. Just as you can feel the energy when you look at those baskets.
I think some of our visitors might be surprised to see these geometrical abstractions in a show about landscape practice. But you described to me once, and this has stuck with me, just the sort of celebratory, revelatory way in which you worked with this thick mayonnaise-like medium directly with your hands, and the way that you saw that as an echo of the rapture that you imagine the Hudson River School painters must have felt in the face of this tremendous landscape.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember saying that, but it's terrific. I hope I really did.
You did.
I think that those folks were probably absolutely overwhelmed by the beauty of the landscape, just as I am. I stood in front of Niagara Falls, the Canadian side, the big horseshoe falls, and you can stand next to where the river rushes by, and it is it's an indescribable feeling. I think the painting describes that feeling much more strongly, much more honestly than I ever could talk about it. And maybe Duran felt the same way, or Minot, is that what her name is? Lucy Minot? Louisa Minot may have felt that same way, that the only way to describe that overwhelming, I mean, it's truly, if you haven't been to the falls, you got to go. Overwhelming sense of the power and beauty of our precious earth. I think she felt the same way as I did.
Kay, we have your Niagara painting on the screen here. Yes, this is the New York Historical Society acquisition. So pleased to have it join our paintings collection. And this painting was identified by Art News as one of the defining artworks of 2023.
Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. I don't know exactly what it means, but I really like it.
So, Kay, could you talk just a bit about the genesis of this work?
Oh, well, I have been quietly daydreaming about painting the falls for years. I first saw them when I was about 18 or 20, and I went with my sister, and it was well, that's a whole nother story because my sister was so funny, but in a lot of ways. But we had a wonderful time. But at the time, I was sort of whelmed. I was just simply whelmed, right? But went home and didn't think about it much for years, and then started thinking about things in the Northeast that I could paint. Because I had been painting mostly in Western or Southwestern areas. And I was trying to think of something that I really thought was fabulous. And of course, Niagara Falls came up. And I'm not exactly sure of the timeline, but we met through Agnes Tang. We met and went to the see all the paintings that you have in storage in New Jersey. And I was reminded there of how much I had always wanted to paint Niagara. And I think I looked at Ms. Minot's painting, and I think there were others by other people. What I remember were the Ken sets, and they weren't, but they blew my mind. But that was, he was not doing Niagara. But a lot of wonderful paintings from the 19th century, late 19th century, most of which I was not familiar with. I certainly had never seen Louisa Minot's painting of Niagara before. But I looked at these and I thought, you know, I really should try to do Niagara. And the reason that I hadn't done it is it just seemed too difficult. I mean, how the heck do you depict Niagara Falls? How do you do that? And looking at all these the Cascade paintings, and I looked at them and I thought, you know, I should really try. I mean, if they can do that, why can't I do that? You know, what the heck? Maybe I can do it better, is what I, of course, thought in my little head. Wouldn't that be nice? So it was that experience of seeing all those paintings together and thinking about it. And if you look in the various museums, there are some great Niagara paintings out there. I believe there's one in the Met. But different viewpoints, different ways of depicting. How do you depict it is always the big question for me. And so my husband and I, and he graciously went to Niagara Falls with me so I could look at it. We had a lovely time, actually. We stayed in Canada, which is always nice. But I stood there for, I don't know, 3-4 hours, would you say? Long time. And really just, I did some silly drawings that you wouldn't even be able to figure out what they are. And I took a lot of photographs. And came home and just decided I had to do it, and I did it. That's all. You have to just get up and do it, you know. It's like anything else. If you're going to do something, you just got to get up and do it. And that's how it's done. That's how I did it. So I'm happy with this painting. And I'm happy it's where it is. I'm happy it's living in New York Historical Society.
I'm happy about that as well, Kay. And you also describe, I love your verbal descriptions of your paintings. You use very vivid language to describe them. Could you just walk us through some of your choices here?
Well, I think the big color choice was the Viridian. And the interesting thing about the river is, you know, the river comes down from, oh God, I suppose it's St. Lawrence, but it comes down and it curves around and falls. There's this giant cascade, right? And then it goes north. So it's interesting the way, the geology of the thing. And it's, when you see it, it really is this color. I swear to you, it's this color. Now, maybe I had a good day. Maybe when the sun is shining differently or a little different weather pattern or different time of year, maybe it's not this color. But I swear to you, it was green. There's a great deal more mist in it than I put in this painting. You know, I'm sure you've all heard of the Maid of the Mist, and there's boats that actually go down there, and everybody gets soaked. It's really fun. But the thing is that for me, the hugeness of the thing was what was really important to convey, that this is a huge cascade. I used to live in Ithaca, New York, and in Ithaca there's a lot of cascades, a lot of falls, and they're very proud of them. But the truth is that they're picayune compared to this giant cascade, a pair of giant cascades actually in between Canada and New York State. So I wanted to convey that geology. I wanted to convey the way it comes down and curves around and then falls in this great cascade. I wanted to convey the power of that river. I mean, it of course lights up New York State and a lot of other areas as well, that power. But it's this tremendous power, natural power, that we see, that you can feel and see. And I also wanted to convey its incredible beauty. It's such a beautiful place. Oh, all those crowds, it's still beautiful. It's just a lovely, lovely place. And the color, I swear to you, is like this. It's this wonderful viridian green. So it's a very moving place. Worth a trip. Worth a trip.
Let's talk about the patterns that you
I forgot about the
overlay.
pattern.
Yes,
Well, the pattern is important because this, of course, is again Indian land, and there are Native people on both sides of the river, of course, and both sides of the Cascades, and the Tuscarora are there, and then there's all of those Haudenosaunee people, the Senecas, the Onondagas, the Cayugas, etc., the Mohawks. All of these people were familiar and of course used the river, but were familiar with this giant cascade. And then the people on the other side, the Canadians, whose tribal name I've forgotten, but they all use pattern that are based on the water and the foam and the mist. I mean, they interpreted these natural shapes through their weaving and their beading and their basket making. They have these wonderful curves and domes of water and sky. And I mean, it's like marvelous patterns. I couldn't cut a stencil that represented those shapes. I can't do that. I can't cut a curve in a stencil. And the patterns are put on with a stencil. I was trained as a printmaker as a kid. The way to do this for me is to make a stencil and print it, right? So what do you do? The way I solved it here is decided that I would use a Haudenosaunee pattern. The Mohawks are Haudenosaunee. The Senecas, as I said, the Cayugas and the Tuscaroras, these are all Haudenosaunee people. It's a Haudenosaunee confederacy, a very old, pre-revolutionary confederacy. And so I realized that since the pattern in most of the Haudenosaunee people are similar, except for, as I said, those who live right near the water, like the Tuscaroras. And this is a Mohawk pattern. And it was, for me, something of a, well, it was a solution to a problem, and I would have liked to have solved it a little differently, but as a matter of fact, it made sense because the Mohawks were Haudenosaunee and part of this confederacy that was around Falls. But this is a Mohawk pattern based on a pattern that is from it's called a jug, actually, by the NMAI. It's a pot that has patterning on it, and this patterning is on that vessel that, as I said, is a Mohawk vessel. That's a rather long explanation, but it presents, I think, the problems and the solutions that I've had in making these works.
I also, hearkening back to your commentary about the difficulty of finding some older East Coast patterns, I do, in a sense, see your use of these types of patterns almost as a recovery and extension. And given that the jug from the National Museum of the American Indian that you were looking at, that was tradition, ceramics tradition that was lost to the Haudenosaunee for a long time and had to be actively recovered by practitioners to revive it, and you're sort of advancing that, pushing that forward. But
I
Kay,
think that's important to make people recognize that not only are we on native land, that there were native people making objects important to them from the land.
just a couple of more questions. You mentioned your use of stenciling to create the patterns. Could you describe that a bit more and how the stencil relates to the brushed landscape?
Oh, as I said, I use a stencil because it's really a way to put a pattern down that's sharply defined. A stencil is literally cut on a thick piece of paper, something that is heavy enough to withstand the pounding of paint, because the paint is, when you put paint down onto a stencil, you use a little stiff brush and it pounds the paint sort of into the surface. So when you see the paintings, the surface of the print of the patterns is different from the painted surface. It looks different. If you felt it, you'd feel it. It feels like a stiff sponge, or those plastic sponges. It feels different because it's stiff. It's the same paint. I use oil paint, but it's the way it's put down, it looks different. And I think it's important that it has those differences. It is not part of the landscape. It is the land. But it's not a part of the depiction of the landscape, so that it becomes a separate thing. And in fact, very often visually, that stencil, and as I said, I was trained as a printmaker, so I was bound to think in these terms, but when you look at it and it's sitting on the surface of the painting, it looks like a barrier. It looks like a fence. It looks like something that's holding you visually back, because it's literally on the surface of the painting. It is not visually inside the painting. If you think of the painting as a window on the world, that stencil is sitting on the glass, right? So it's stopping the viewer from, so presumably you see that pattern, and it's absolutely individually nothing else but a Native American pattern. You see that pattern, and it's got to stop you the way you think about that landscape a little bit. Maybe not a lot, but a little bit. It's got to make you think, why the heck did this woman put this right here in front of me? Well, obviously, I put it there to stop you. To stop you, to slow you down. It's a speed bump. It slows you down enough to realize that the message is the painting is of native land, and it's all native land. Every bit of it. That's where we're living.
And that compositional speed bump, I think, is so effective by itself. And then when you set it next to some of the 19th century Hudson River School paintings, which compositionally invite the viewer directly into the land, it really reads so powerfully. You're asking us to pause.
I'm asking for a pause. Exactly. I just want people to think about what they're looking at. And how beautiful our land is. How very, very beautiful it is.
So I have one or two more questions, Gordon, depending on. Okay. One more question and then a wrap-up question. I know your interest in patterning started with a fascination with parfleche.
Yes.
Could you talk about what parfleche is?
Oh, well, parfleche bags were made by Native women. Only the women made them. it's said that the women made them because they're closer to the cosmos, but that's, I think, a good line. Anyway, women made these wonderful parfleche bags, and the purpose of a parfleche bag, it's a rawhide bag. The purpose was to carry foodstuff, mostly, when people were migrating. This is made by migrating tribes only. I don't think that other people made them, but they were oftentimes big. The one that you see upstairs is a large bag. I mean, these are not little bags. These are not handbags, you know, these are big things. And they would put in food that is preserved, like jerky and, you know, things that can be used later, can be stored. Most of the people that made them had horses eventually. When the Spanish brought them after that, they had horses. And so they would migrate and they would use these bags on the horses sometimes, and or they would pull them in their, oh gosh, the name of those things they pulled has left my brain. I hate that. Anyway, travois, on the travois. But they're beautifully decorated, and the women who made them were particularly honored because it isn't something that anybody can do. I mean, you know, when you see it, you'll see that these are very gifted painters who made these. I've always thought of them as the first abstractions in the United States. I think that's a good way to look at them. It's modern art. You'll see. They're just absolutely gorgeous. And I went out to Montana because I was on the trail of the battle sites of Chief Joseph. And so I was going around, and the Nez Perce, Chief Joseph was a Nez Perce, and the Nez Perce people, women, made these gorgeous, gorgeous things. The ones that is upstairs is a Nez Perce bag. Other tribes of, as I said, migrating tribes made them as well. But the patterns are different from between each tribe. So you can identify that that's a Nez Perce bag. And there are similar ones. The Shoshone and the Crow make similar ones, but they're not the same. I mean, you can tell them all apart, which is nice. Anyway, I got very involved in these things intellectually and emotionally. I mean, it's just very involving. Because they said so much about the women of those tribes. And so I started using these bags, and from there, I realized that how much this identified as a native product, but also how much it identified that place as a native place. So I started using patterns, native patterns, from that time. So you'll see the paintings, those early paintings that have the parfleche bags in them, and it led to the later paintings with the patterns. So the evolution of the paintings is right here. You can see it. The last, I believe somebody said it's 60 years. It's more like 70 years, a lot of work. A lot of history.
And these particular paintings that are shown alongside the parfleche example are called Our Land. Could you talk about that title?
Our Land. I actually had a dealer who wouldn't show the painting because she said it was too strong, too political. That was some years ago. Nobody would say that today, of course, but they are strong. They do have this damn it, this is our land kind of quality, I think. That's good. That's good. It's a good statement.
So final question before I think we turn to your questions, and that is, Kay, we have this show, Kay WalkingStick, Hudson River School, shown at the New York Historical Society, which focuses on American art and history, and now shown at another preeminent institution for American art, the Addison. And so may I ask what your thoughts are about the relationship between Native American art and American art.
Well, I think we're one and the same. I'm sorry, I think we're one and the same. I mean, it is true that we have only been citizens since 1924. Isn't that incredible? But we've always been Americans. And we have always made art. I think that Parfleche proves it. But we've always made art. We've always been here. I have never understood why there was any reason, and I feel that way about African Americans as well. Why is there any difference between showing an African American artist and a Native American artist and a Euro American artist? Why aren't we all just American artists? I think that and I think that your two institutions prove that.
Okay, thank you so much for entertaining these questions. And Gordon, I think
we don't have a third microphone, but I'll just grab yours and then maybe you could share. Does anyone have questions? If you want to raise your hands. Okay, I see one in the back. I'll run over with the mic. Well, not run, but I'll walk over with it.
Okay, I just wanted to start with the fact that I just loved your paintings, your drawing style, and how every detail is very specific, particular, and intentional. And I just wanted to continue about the painting Our Land, and specifically about the juxtaposition with Our Land Variation 2, which I really loved. And I wanted to ask, like, what was the main significance, in your opinion, of this juxtaposition? The color palette and like what did you intend to symbolize by it mainly? So
there are two paintings there that are called Our Land, I believe. One is a oil stick on paper, which is a drawing of the Bittersweet Mountains, Bitterroot Mountains. The Bitterroot Mountains are between Idaho and Montana. And they're of course, part of the Rockies, and formidable, really formidable. And the Chief Joseph led his band over those mountains. He was from Oregon, and he was heading toward the Canadian border. He wanted to get into Canada because they had relatives in Canada, you know. Our relatives always help us out. So they were going to go see their relatives in the Nakotas, I believe they were, in Canada. And they started this long trek to get away from the Union soldiers, the American soldiers who wanted to put them onto a reservation. So they were trying to just protect themselves. This was in 1877. October was the final date. Anyway, they went across at the top of Idaho and over the Bitterroot Mountains and then circled south a bit, and there was a number of battles with the U.S. troops as they slowly took the band through Montana, heading north, went to Bear Paw. The final battle was at Bear Paw, and of course did not make it into Canada, which was no distance away by then. It's a tragic story, but those paintings are about that tragic story and the strength of these people to carry on. And the interesting thing is that most of those battles were not lost. The Indians, the natives, got away, usually. Chief Joseph is always credited as being a great military leader because he managed to get his people from Oregon to, it was the Wallowa Mountains where he started, from the Wallowa Mountains across this difficult landscape if you drive through it today, it's difficult landscape and rugged. And he had his people and something like 300 horses. The cavalry had cannons. And of course, that's the big difference, is they had cannons. But to read about these battles is fascinating and worthwhile. If you're interested in history, it's a fascinating history. But those paintings that I did are about that trip, about that travail, and about the landscape that they passed through. Does that answer your question at all? Sort of, kind of. But anyway, it was my interest in this historical figure who's worth studying.
Yeah, and I also have one more question. That is that about your Niagara painting, right? So, as you said, that you stayed in Canada on the Canadian side. And what I really like about, well, at least about how I see your paintings, about how these paintings made me feel, are that these paintings they feel very like through the eyes of a Native American and through the eyes of this specific nation. And what I wanted to ask is, would you change like your approach depending on what side of Niagara you wanted to portray? Do you think that this kind of historical part is relevant, or do you think that it's all like, since it all was one confederation, it would be the same portrayal?
Well, I think that the native people of Canada are Americans too. I mean, we're all here together. There isn't really a difference between the native people of, say, New York State and the native people of the Canadian, I mean, I don't know whether it's Alberta or what province it is, but there's no difference between those native people. I mean, the Lakotas, for instance, of northern Montana, right across the border, they're called Nakotas. There's no difference, really. We're all one here. It's true that the tribes are very different in language, we're very different in customs, but nevertheless, we're all Indians. We're all Indians together here, and this is still our land, a native land, whether it's in Canada. And I mean, I don't know if you know much about Canadian history in relationship to Native Americans, but they've had as many problems as we have, and then some, I think. So that the problems are going on similarly between the two nations. And, you know, Canadians are Americans. I mean, you go to Canada and you really feel good and at home. Canada is a wonderful place to be. I hope that that's sensed in the paintings.
Questions?
Yes.
More?
There's a lady right down front here.
Oh, okay, okay. Sue, you'll go first. And then I saw a hand back there, so we'll go there.
I just have a question about, you said you have two equal squares that you put together to make the triangle, and I'm curious what the seam down the middle, how that operates for you as a visual structure within the landscape.
Well, it's changed over the years. I mean, everything that I've done changes over the years, right? We change. We change. First, it was important that one side was expressing something slightly different than the other side. That one was an interior and the other was sort of exterior. One was more spiritual, the other was more corporeal, if you wish. They were different in varying ways. And then I started working with both sides being equal, In other words, originally it was like two stanzas of a poem. You know, one side was one thing, and the other was a direct, indirect relationship to it, but it was like stanzas of a poem. Today, I don't see it that way. I see it as a one-world thing. On the other hand, that line still acts, it's a different kind of speed bump, but it's still a kind of speed bump, because you look at it and it reminds you that this is a pictorial thing. This is a picture. This is a painting. This is what it is. And that line reminds you of this simple fact. I don't think it hurts the flow of it, but I do think it slows you down. Just as the pattern in the foreground will slow you down, that line in the middle kind of slows you down, hoping that people will take a little time to look at these things. The other thing it does is it makes it possible for me to carry them. Simple like that.
Was there a hand back? Oh, I see a hand back there.
Even still, I have to, with the really big ones, I can't carry them. My husband can, but he's bigger than I am.
Hi, I can't help but notice like the bright colors on the hide bags and Our Land variation too. And I'm wondering, what do the colors mean, and do they symbolize anything?
Do we have a picture of that? Is it up there and I can't see it? The colors are bright. I believe that's a sunset. The Bitterroots, I was seeing the Bitterroots looking west. I was driving through Montana. I did these pictures of the Bitterroots, and so I was seeing the sunset. So I think it was probably inspired by an orange sunset. On the other hand, I play with colors just like any other artist does. These are not naturalistic colors very often. They are heightened colors. They are, I remember a teacher I had years and years ago at college said, "Up your color." And I always thought it was a little bit rude, but he meant, strengthen those colors. Make them more forceful. I like contrast in color, so I will add contrast where there might be less contrast if you're looking at it. I heighten that contrast. So these are technical tricks. I mean, they're just painterly methods to get the viewer to really look at this painting and to heighten its strength. I like paintings that are strong. I mean, I enjoy looking at, for instance, there's some Kenset paintings in the show, and I happen to love Kenset. And they're very subtle colors, and they're very quiet, and there's not a lot of bluster and huge color and bright contrast. And I can enjoy that in other people's work very, very much. But usually in my own work, I like it to be strong.
Maybe one last question, if there's one out there. Yep.
Thank you so much for being with us today. This is really special. I've been thinking, as I've been looking at your works, about different representations of space and land, and how throughout time and place there's a different way of representing land. So you have either something that's abstract, or you have something that's attempting to be representational. And I think for me, something that really appeals about the maquette that's actually really small that we saw in the really large form is that for me, it collapses so many different forms of representation. So it makes me think of the abstract expressionists. It conveys a more representational landscape in the middle, but then the way that the square is pulled into the different corners evokes for me the way that You have earlier Native representations on hides that show land as not as relational, as the relationship between peoples, rather than attempt to lay over, a grid the way that early colonial maps did. So for me, over and over again in these paintings, but there's something about this maquette. I see this coming together or overlay or conversation between different ways of thinking about space and land, and it's just so exciting. So I guess that's not a question. I guess it's just thank you for making my brain fizz with the art.
I really appreciate what you've had to say, because I think, you really see it. You see well, you see thoroughly. And it's nice to hear someone talk about my work who really sees it well. Because I think with all artists, if you look at their work slowly, and then think about it, and then go back and look at it again, I think that you can see a whole lot of things that maybe even the artist didn't intend to put there. But with good art, there's a soul that you can sense. There's a meaning that you can sense. And then there's a joy of art making that you can sense. And I think that that's what you're seeing, is all of that. And that's good.
Wow. Thank you.
But I don't bow well.
No, we cannot thank Wendy and Kay enough for joining us. We are so grateful. And the museum is open, so please, if you haven't seen the show, please do come and see it. If you've already seen it, come and see it again. And thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you.